Somaliland, a self-governed state in the Horn of Africa, is grabbing headlines for its newfound geostrategic importance and its quest for independence. What's driving the spotlight on this land of 6 million people? And how does the US-China rivalry factor in? We take a deep dive into its history, geography, and geopolitics. Tensions are running high between Somaliland and Somalia as the US and China take their battle to the Horn of Africa. US President Donald Trump is said to be considering recognizing Somaliland as an independent country in return for gaining access to a military base there in order to counter China's influence and monitor regional threats such as the Houthis in Yemen. Some U.S. lawmakers, such as Scott Perry, who belong to Trump's Republican Party, are pushing for statehood to Somaliland. Perry has introduced a bill proposing formal U.S. recognition for Somaliland. Project 2025 makes a similar pitch. Project 2025 is a name given to a document called Mandate for Leadership with a conservative promise. Under a paragraph titled Counter Malign Chinese Activity on the Continent, it calls for the recognition of Somaliland's statehood as a hedge against the US's deteriorating position in Djibouti. The 900-odd-page document has been compiled by the Right Thing Heritage Foundation and more than 100 other conservative organizations. It offers a roadmap of sorts for the second Trump presidency. You could call it a policy wish list or a set of proposals that would impose an ultra-conservative social vision on the U.S. government. Now, before I proceed any further, let me give you a brief history of Somaliland and why it matters. Somaliland sits on the northern coast of Somalia, covering 176,000 square kilometers along the Gulf of Aden. In terms of area, it is around the same size as the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, or slightly smaller than the West Asian country of Syria. Bordered by Ethiopia, Djibouti and Somalia's Puntland region, its 850-kilometer coastline is a gateway to vital Red Sea shipping lanes. Somaliland's strategic location makes it a focal point in regional geopolitics. With a population composed mostly of ethnic Somalis, its terrain spans coastal plains and rugged mountains. A former British protectorate, Somaliland gained independence in June 1960, briefly uniting with Italian Somaliland to form the country of Somalia. By 1991, after a devastating civil war collapsed Somalia's government, Somaliland reasserted its independence. It became a de facto state with its own currency, passport and regular elections. But Somalia considers Somaliland as a breakaway region and rejects its claim for independence. Despite Somaliland's de facto statehood, Somalia's government in Mogadishu asserts full territorial control over it. Now, the Horn of Africa is a veritable geopolitical chessboard. Somaliland is located at the intersection of many converging, oftentimes competing interests, economic, military and strategic, of many countries in the region and beyond. Now, the scramble for foreign bases along the Horn of Africa's coast is of particular concern to the U.S., which established its first and largest military facility on the African continent in Djibouti in the year 2002. China opened a military base in Djibouti in 2017. It is China's first overseas military base. Now, the U.S. is eyeing another base, this time in the neighboring Somaliland, the Red Sea port of Berbera. Now, Berbera has a 4,000-long kilometer runway built by the erstwhile Soviet Union during the Cold War. It has one of the longest landing strips in Africa. The airfield was once rented by the U.S. Space Agency for space shuttles. It was recently inaugurated and renovated by the United Arab Emirates, but remains vacant. For its part, Somaliland is pitching Berbera as an attractive proposition for the U.S. and as an alternative to a congested Djibouti, where the U.S. base sits next to that of the Chinese and some European nations. An article published by the New York Times is headlined, "African Breakaway State Offers U.S. a Chance to Stick It to China." It says that as the trade war with China heats up, a new U.S. foothold on the African continent could help counter Chinese influence. Somaliland is one of the few places in Africa that has maintained close diplomatic ties with Taiwan and has positioned itself as an indispensable U.S. ally willing to stand up to China. Somaliland's ties with Taiwan and Berbera's potential as U.S. base escalate this rivalry. Recently, Somalia banned Taiwan nationals from entering it. Somaliland's President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi wrote a letter to Trump in January this year in which he said, "Many countries, when forced to choose between the U.S. and China, opt for the latter. We have consistently chosen and will continue to choose America, Taiwan, and other free democratic partners." Tensions escalated when Taiwan opened its representative office in Somaliland's capital, Hargeisa, in 2020. Since then, Taiwan has spent millions of dollars on military training, agriculture, medicine, and infrastructure in Somaliland. But there's a catch. Recognizing Somaliland could shift U.S. strategy in the Horn of Africa. For one, it risks alienating Somalia, and two, it would upset the U.S.'s allies such as Egypt and Turkey, who fear that the move would set a precedent for secessionist movements across the region. Already, relations between Somaliland and Somalia have been set back. Somaliland suspended all peace talks with Somalia following a controversial visit by Somalia's Prime Minister to the disputed Sul region. Somaliland called it a violation of its sovereignty. Tensions further escalated when Somalia's president, not to be outdone by Somaliland, wrote his own letter to Trump offering the U.S. exclusive control of 2 air bases and 2 ports, including the port of Berbera. Somaliland retorted that Somalia did not have the authority to provide the U.S. with an asset it did not control. And Ethiopia waded into the conflict when it entered into a deal with Somaliland that gave it access to the Red Sea. In return, Somaliland claimed that Ethiopia would recognize it as an independent state. Although Ethiopia has not publicly committed itself to recognizing Somaliland's statehood, the agreement set off a major diplomatic and military standoff between Ethiopia and Somalia. It raised concerns about a wider conflict, one that would pull in Ethiopia's longtime adversaries Eritrea and Egypt. But Somalia and Ethiopia have since agreed to end their dispute with a little help from Turkey. What complicates matters is Somalia's own checkered history with the U.S. Memories of a 1993 incident are fresh in the minds of some when the bodies of 18 U.S. soldiers were dragged through the streets of Mogadishu after Somali fighters shot down U.S. helicopters. As for Trump, he withdrew most American troops from Somalia during his first term in office. The soldiers had been deployed there to fight against Al-Shabaab, a terror group affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Today, the U.S. retains only a few hundred troops in Somalia. According to reports, some U.S. officials close to Trump, who is now into his second term in office, are in favor of closing the U.S. embassy in Mogadishu. So, in conclusion, after 34 years of its de facto independence, no country has formally recognized Somaliland. The Trump government's interest in statehood for Somaliland is clear, but it has not committed to it just yet. But Somaliland's President Abdullahi remains hopeful. In an interview to the Guardian newspaper published in the UK, he says recognition is on the horizon. President Abdullahi says it's a matter of time, not if, but when. And who will lead the recognition of Somaliland? Some reports suggest that Trump's nascent proposal of resettling Palestinians from Gaza to Somaliland could spur the U.S. to recognize the territory as a separate country. As Somaliland navigates regional rivalries and seeks global recognition, its future hangs in the balance. Will the U.S. take the historic step of recognizing Somaliland as a separate country? Will Somaliland finally become an independent nation, the 194th member of the United Nations? Watch this space.